Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
I have a great guest today. And before I introduce her, though, you're going to indulge me, and we're going to talk a little bit about an analogy that I've come up with about urban gardening and content marketing. I know it sounds a bit far-fetched, but stick with me because I think it holds water. Okay. First, let me assure you that neither of these two pastimes are particularly easy. Both require very specific skills, often earned through experience. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions, and both are deeply gratifying when it all comes together. So my garden in New York City, I have a garden in New York City, has poor drainage, limited sunlight, voracious aphids, giant destructive worms. I mean, who knew that even worms could be destructive? And terminally acidic soil. Yet, through a process of experimentation and tender loving care, I found a collection of annuals and perennials that actually thrive for all but the few frozen winter months. Now, like a good content marketer, I have an overall goal for the garden: bring a little bit of unexpected serenity to all who see it. Like a good content marketer, I deploy a mixture of evergreens and seasonal variations. And like a good content marketer, I continue to experiment. For example, this year, I gave elephant ears. Those are those giant leafed things that are technically called colocasia, another chance. And they blew us away. They got bigger than this bird bath that we have in our garden, which is about 3 feet tall. So your content marketing challenge may not sound as hostile as my garden, but in truth, it's a lot worse out there. The deluge of competitive noise is unbelievable. Your blog posts, your videos, infographic, tweets, white papers, webinars, whatever you create will be seriously challenged to shine through and attract the right eyeballs, let alone generate a buzz. And undoubtedly, your content needs some fertilizer in the form of, say, paid media and PR, preferably both, to help that content reach its fullest potential. Okay, so now I've beaten that analogy into the ground. Let me introduce you to my favorite non-garden variety marketer, Connie O'Brien. Connie is the CMO of Tungsten Network. She and I first met when she was the head of internet strategy at AXA Equitable back in 2010, when Renegade was helping AXA get a foothold in social media. She then moved to Vonage as VP of e-commerce, drafted there by our mutual friend, Barbara Goodstein. Shout out to Babs. And she joined Tungsten in early 2016 as Chief Marketing Officer. And I'm delighted to disclose, as we do on this show, that Connie brought in Renegade as her lead content partner. So welcome to the show, Connie.
Thanks, Drew. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about content.
How the analogy work for you?
The analogy worked great. I think that was terrific. I also picked up a couple of ideas. I have some of those similar problems up in the Bronx in my garden. All
right. Well, we have a secondary sideline podcast coming out in gardening, and stay tuned. Okay. So we're going to talk about a lot today in terms of content marketing and how you create a big old strategy that works and holds all the pieces together. But I wanted to step back with you because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile yesterday, and I was struck by the fact that you made the jump to digital really early on. I mean, you joined Modem Media back in 1996 after several years at a traditional advertising agency. What was it about digital that sort of got you excited?
Well, I remember the first time that I heard anything about the web. When I was doing something, and a client said to me that he wanted to do something on the web, and so I was sort of setting out to figure it out. But the real draw, once I got under the hood on it was about bringing your brand to life. I love branded experiences. I love figuring out how to make some sort of interaction that resonates with the customer, that will reflect on your brand, and hopefully make an emotional connection.
Okay. branded experiences. That's a good thing. We're going to come back to that. But in 2005, you made the leap to the client side, a leap that those of you who've been listening know that I never made. And what inspired you to make that switch?
What I found in my life in the agency world was that I really loved the collaboration with the creative people in the agency world. But at the end of the day, the strategy, the overall direction to fulfill on the business objectives were set by the quote unquote client. And so I wanted to give it a try and see whether or not I had the chops to lead that kind of strategy definition, as well as reinforce the brand, as well as collaborative teams on the client side, and then add in the really wonderful collaborative, creative side of an agency and see what we came up with.
And for one, I'm very glad that you did that, since we've had a chance to work with you. And my experience is that former agency people who become clients are either amazing or not so much. And and this is not just flattery. This is truth. You know how to work with your agencies to get the most out of them. And it is a collaborative process. And I want to refer back to earlier episodes. Check out the episode with Jackson J from Box.com. He talked a lot about the reason to switch between going from agency side to client side. He was pretty emphatic about it. But I wanted to tell you one other story about that, just because I think it's put a punctuation point on it. A former renegade who was one of the most amazing strategists we ever had went off to business school, Kellogg, and then later moved to the Clorox brand. And what he liked about being on the client side that he didn't have on the agency side is control of all the levers. And I'll never forget that expression. So
I definitely am a control freak. There's no doubt about it, and I'm sure you can attest to it on some of our phone calls. There's no doubt I like to be in control, and you're definitely right. When you're right there setting the strategy, you get to say yay or nay.
There you go. All right. So I am in control of when we take breaks. So which is about really, that's a pretty big thing for me right now. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive deep into the marketing that the program that Connie has driven at Tungsten Network. So hang with us. Hey, it's Drew. I wanted to use this break to ask you a single question. Are you a courageous marketer? Do you have the courage to go to your board of directors and say marketing could drive the growth of this company? We just need 3 times the budget. Do you have the courage to take the big idea that you already have and extend it internally and externally through influencers, through the media, through all of your content? If you're a courageous marketer but aren't sure how to roadmap all of this, I have a big idea for you. It's called Renegade Thinking. It's a program that we've developed and work with exclusively for B2B marketers, generally at large companies. And I want to give you my cell phone, 917-679-8852. Just text Renegade Thinking to 917-679-8852, and we can talk about how you can cut through. Okay, we're back, and my guest is Connie O'Brien, CMO of Tungsten Network. Let's talk about Tungsten. Can you help first the folks that aren't in the industry understand what it is you all do?
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, quite simply, we are a secure and trusted, compliant business transaction network.
So that means that if you are a buyer,
yes,
and you want to get goods from a supplier,
yes,
you manage the e-invoicing process.
The e-invoicing process and other adjacent services like foreign transaction, early payment, that would happen as you were trying to get paid. We make it simpler to get paid.
So let's talk about the marketing challenge that you faced that led to the campaign that you are running right now. Let's step back a little bit and go, and what was it that sort of got you down the what I'll call the friction track, if you will?
Yeah, so let me take a step back and just say that Tungsten Network hadn't been doing any marketing. What they considered marketing was, for better, for worse, investor relations. And again, we're headquartered in London, so investor relations in the UK is quite different than investor relations here. All of our effort had been on investor relations, and so they made a strategic decision to focus on marketing, digital marketing, and thus I entered the business. So I had to take a step back and figure out how I was going to create some sort of resonance with our prospective customers, as well as the suppliers, so our customers who are already on the network, so that they could see the full value of the supply chain. There's lots of friction in the global supply chain. Invoices that aren't correct, things that fall out of the, things that don't make it from paper to a process, the piece of paper that walks around the whole company before it gets approved only to get rejected, lots of friction. And so when you and I met, and we started talking about storytelling as a way of coming up with content. And we started describing all of those pieces. You very nicely put this idea of friction as a platform in a way for us to go out to the customers to create some sort of resonance.
And what struck me, and this is sort of how you're really getting in the inner workings. What struck me was that Tungsten Network, one of its real point of difference was the ability, a lot of the things that they just did and didn't really think about actually remove the friction from the process. And one of the examples was, just getting your vendors on board on a system like this. And in Europe, you can't just order them to do it necessarily, but in the US, you can. That's what's happened to us with a lot of systems, of billing systems. But you make it you really bend over backwards to bring the vendors in. And to me, that was just one example of the kinds of ways that you remove friction, from the supply chain.
Yeah, we think supplier onboarding is not only one of our unique selling propositions, but it's absolutely fundamental. And that's why creating some sort of branded platform, our content marketing, needed to really resonate so that we could continually reinforce what the benefits are. We help these suppliers get paid on time.
Okay. So let's talk about how that then rolled into sort of marketing and how a campaign like this built around an idea that initially is really focused on some of the problems out there. How did you sort of roll this program out?
Well, we had to do it carefully because, as I said, our idea of marketing traditionally had been investor relations. And so what we started with, as you well know, is we started with our employees as advocates. So we created various pieces around making friction fighters out of our employees to help put out some messages into the social media space. We don't spend a tremendous amount of money. I mean, I guess we spend about on average for other, normal sized B2B customers or B2B businesses, but we don't spend a tremendous amount of money. So we needed to make sure that each piece of content that was put out there would have multiple impact, that it was easily shared, that people could retweet it, that people could take a white paper, put it out into their LinkedIn profile and have some sort of relevance to it. So we really had to sort of set up the whole framework and deliver it to our employees, to make sure that they understood exactly what their job was, including helping our sales team do social selling and telling them the things that they could write that would help to create a lead.
I think that's such an important point. I'm going to put a punctuation, another emphasis on it that, when you launch a new campaign, particularly one that is content centric, it's essential that you get your employees to buy in on it. Because if they don't believe in it and they don't use it, it really doesn't stand a chance. But the flip side of it is if they buy into it and it feels like something that's empowering to them, then they really do get behind it. And I think the thing that was interesting about the Friction Fighter program for the sales guys is you were enlightened enough to recognize that you could help them build their personal brands and do it in a way that also was good for Tungsten. And I think a lot of companies sort of waffle in that area. They're not really sure, what do we do with that? And you guys just embraced it and just went right and said, okay, sales guys, build your profile, off you go, LinkedIn Navigator, rock and roll.
Yeah, and I think it helped too that I have a very collaborative head of sales who really wanted to see us move together and succeed together. My KPIs are his KPIs. And we really work together to make sure that we're putting the appropriate tools in front of the sales team. It's a nimble team. It's small, putting the appropriate tools in front of them to help them get as many marketing qualified leads that easily turn into sales qualified leads as soon as possible.
Okay. So we sell into we get the sales guys on board. And then how do you bring that out to the broader audience?
So what was really interesting was what we decided to do was to talk to our customers. We have a lot of data that's at our fingertips based on various research companies in the marketplace. But we needed to hear more unfiltered, right? Not what our customer relationship managers were telling us, but unfiltered around what our customers were looking for. And so what we did was we developed frictionfinder.com, which is essentially 2 parts. An ongoing tool to get voice of the customer, as well as an overall index that we're putting out into the marketplace and getting some really interesting press to create awareness around Tungsten Network. And this survey, asking customers about how much time they spend on, inputting invoices, or how much time they spend running the invoice around, or how much time, all about inefficiency, cost per invoice, all those things that create friction in the supply chain. This is giving us real data that we can go back to and help to further our product roadmap, as well as continually talk to them and make sure that we're giving them the right statistics as they're moving their business forward. So measuring their own KPIs. And
so once you had this research and this information on the costs and hours wasted, were you able to get PR for it?
Oh, absolutely. So we have an amazing PR system, and we have a very, very strong player in the UK, Speed Communications, and they should definitely be called out for their hard work. They were able to, working with our lead content agency, Renegade, they were able to put it together really nicely, and we got lots and lots of pickups in the UK and some nice mentions in the US through our PR agency, Cognito.
Yeah. And by the way, we really just loved partnering with Speed. I'm going to give them a shout out too, because it's been a great collaboration. And so on that research, which was fielded by against 422, which was a good number. It was a sizable number. And that's in the index report. There was a lot of good stuff. And what the nice thing about having a content agency and a PR firm partner like that is the PR firm can really look at this content from a PR lens and sort of help shape it into something that is PRable, if you will. So the Friction Index was really good at getting a lot of PR. Let's talk about the Friction Finder, which to me is really an amazing tool. And I used to call this marketing as service, where there's something of genuine value to your prospects when they take this study. Talk a little bit about the Friction Finder, and diagnostic tool, really.
Yeah, so this was I think this was a great success in coming together with IOFM as well, which is one of the industry research companies. And with them, we not only shared about this at a conference, but they helped us to design a survey that's 20 points around, or 20 questions rather, around the whole cycle of starting the e-invoicing process all the way through to completely automated, so that you can measure where you are in the journey as you're digitizing your back end.
Okay, I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about, as Connie's mentioned, a lot of agencies and how you deal with a multi-agency environment, and how do you make sure that all of this content ultimately drives leads and sales through the pipeline.
Hey, it's Drew. I was at a conference the other day and somebody looked at my saw lapel pen and said, "What's up with that?" And I said, well, what's the one thing that marketing has always had to do? Forget digital, forget all this stuff. What is the one marketing imperative? And he looked at me and went, "Cut through." And I went, "Yes, ding, 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 ding. That's right. Cut through. That is what marketing must do." And it's not just cutting through the clutter, although that's really important, because if your marketing doesn't cut through the clutter, it's like the proverbial tree in the forest that falls and nobody hears it. But it's also cutting through the crap and the processes that
inhibit innovation. We've been working a lot lately with some CMOs to help them cut through the crap and get at the essence of what is their big idea and how can they make a case to expand that idea across their business. That, to me, is cutting through. Okay, we're back. And my guest is Connie O'Brien, CMO of Tungsten Networks. So, Connie, you've mentioned a lot of agencies in this, Renegade, of course, and Speed, and then an external research partner from IOFM. How do you sort of, as the CMO, manage effectively a multi-agency, a team like this?
Well, first of all, I have a great team internally, and each of them has roles and responsibilities that are very specific to the parts of the journey. And we know that the journey isn't necessarily a funnel anymore or a straight path. So sometimes it gets a little confusing. But for the most part, I would say everybody's pretty clear on their roles on my team. So that helps for the agencies to interface. So one of the ways is that I, from the get-go, have said I want collaboration. If Renegade and Speed went away, or Renegade Incognito went away and thought of some really great idea and came back to us and presented it, I mean, that would be my 100% dream. And I think we're getting really close. So first of all, it has to come from, quote unquote, the top. And so that's a culture that I have really put in place. The second thing is that everybody is an expert and everybody has ideas to share. And I try and make it so that it's, everybody has an opportunity to not only contribute and learn and grow, but also so they can grow their revenue, right? Which is the game that we're all in. But we can't do any of it if we don't have KPIs that we're meeting. And so when you don't have the money to go out and do, strong brand building, going out and having a brand tracking study will be difficult because who knows how long the kind of money we have will take to build, even a 0.5 percentage point. So we have to drive leads. We have to drive engagements and conversion factor. We have to continually optimize those things. The amount of social that we do and how many interactions and growing our pool. And yes, we still do look at website traffic, but what really I'm trying to do is trying to come up with metrics in the paid, earned, and owned model, even for PR, right? So really making sure that we're clear on how we're spending our money wisely.
And so I'm going to speak to the collaboration issue as an agency that is in that position. What it comes down to from the agency side is being trustworthy and trusting the partners. And I will say both with Speed and Dragon Search, who does the SEM, we've built a terrific relationship with them and would partner. In fact, we're partnering with Dragon and another client because we just thought it was a great experience and they have such expertise and would do the same with Speed in a heartbeat. But it is tricky. I will say it's also tricky. And what's great is that we meet fairly frequently, or at least frequently enough. And I think that is another key thing that you brought to the table, where the multi-agencies sort of, here's the goal, everybody. How are we going to get there together? And so setting those goals, setting the roles, and then saying, okay, those are your roles, but that doesn't mean your ideas can't leak beyond your roles. And that's, I think, really important because otherwise everybody's just micro-focused on there and you have these little turf battles.
Exactly. So it's really important to bring everyone to the table, hearing the same message, being consistent around collaboration and roles, rewarding good ideas. But also, what I think is really interesting is that when I took this job, I was really clear that I wanted to do storytelling. And so what I've also created a little bit of that I have to figure out how to get out of is that when we presented our quarterly business results for the marketing agencies so that we could be accountable and say, we've spent X dollars and here's what we got for it, I then created the siloed story. I then created chapters of a book that aren't necessarily touching one another. And so now I have to figure out how to go back and encourage everybody to share their results in a way that we tell the story of some really incredible work that's happening. I mean, our sales lead pipeline is chock full. We have a long sales cycle, but we have never seen this many leads in a very long time. So we feel really hopeful, but now I need to, quote unquote, defend that budget as we continue to move forward.
It was interesting, and I can sort of address some of this, is that a lot of the things that we do in partnership with the other agencies. And so when they were presenting their numbers, they were our numbers too. And it was very difficult for us to isolate our numbers from their numbers, and it wasn't even in anybody's interest to do so. So I love the idea of telling a collective story, and, one presentation where we show how these pieces fit together, and do drive all the leads and close. So when you look at the friction, which as far as I'm concerned, we're in phase one of the friction story, and we'll stay tuned for another episode when we talk about phase two. But how are you measuring all this stuff? I mean, we did some amazing videos and they got a lot of views, but how do we sort of wrap our minds around the value of that in the context of everything else?
So I could remember being at Moda Media, and we put our first banner on the internet for AT&T. And they said, great, now how do we measure? What does that mean, an impression, right? And everybody went, well, it's not like a GRP exactly, right? So everybody went, to be honest, there's some of that happening still around what is the value of buying an impression. So all we can do is to score leads, track them, end-to-end journey. How are we decreasing the time that someone goes from a general lead to an MQL to an SQL? Are we decreasing those times in the stage? And so we're having to come up with some new measurements that actually, even with all of our MarTech stack, it's difficult to get to. So we're still sort of struggling with how we're going to get there, but we have a path forward around the actual KPIs, around the actual things we have to measure in order to get there.
I just thought of a Ben Franklin story that doesn't quite fit, but I'm going to tell it anyway. There's Franklin happened to be in Paris when the first hot air balloon went up into the air, and he was standing next to a Frenchman, and he spoke enough French to understand that the gentleman said, "Oh, I see it, but what good is it? What good is it?" And Franklin turned to him and said, "What good is a baby?" And what, the point was that sometimes you need, this balloon obviously started a whole world of aviation, and sometimes we can't measure exactly at that moment the value of something, but if we're consistent, if the pieces are solving, if you're doing marketing of value to your customers, and if the pieces hold together, and I think that's one of the keys here is they do, and they hold together across all of the platforms, your baby is much more likely to grow into a very productive adult.
Yeah, that actually is a good analogy, and it does hold together. And that's kind of what I've been saying is that, our baby is only really, X amount of months old, right? So I've been saying, we're not at the toddler stage yet, but we're coming close to, them getting ready to walk. So we need to just put one foot in front of the other. But that measurement, when you're a company, right, when you're a public company and you're fighting for dollars, that measurement is so key. And that's why we're really pushing the boundary on where we can go.
Yeah. I tell you, I've been in this business a long time. I love a quote from John Hayes, who was the CMO of American Express. He said, you don't want to be overly obsessive about the things that you can measure and overly upset about the things that you can't necessarily, because sometimes you can measure the wrong thing. And that can be just as bad, as not having metrics at all. So, okay, enough of that philosophy. Let's get back to, just from this most recent experience as CMO, what do you think the biggest lessons learned have been?
The primary lesson throughout my whole career that was never more important, because I'm in a remote role. Headquarters again is in London, and I work out of my apartment. 6 weeks out of every quarter, is to listen. Because not only is there really great, information, with long-term resident knowledge that we've never captured in other places, but the storytellers are in our office, the people who are on the sales front line, the people who are talking to the customers on a regular basis. So really being sure to listen to make sure that those nuances are getting picked up. The other is that, in a testing methodology, right? So if we talk about the actual assets that are in the marketplace, in a testing methodology, it doesn't matter whether something's black or blue, uses the word use or utilized, right? What matters is what the results are. And so I think focusing people on more of that direct marketing like thinking and how we've needed to expand it from traditional direct marketing and digital, even digital for Tungsten Network, I think that that's been really important to keep going back to say, it doesn't matter. Let's A/B test it. Let's multivariate test it, right? We're never going to get to statistical significance given the size of our business and the amount of money we spend, but we're certainly going to get direction. And we're going to know if we make a mistake pretty quick.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I'm going to attempt to wrap this really interesting conversation together and step back for a second. So as we look at the program, the Friction campaign, it really started with a story that you wanted to tell, and a story idea that was big enough to encompass just about every aspect of the content that the brand wanted to share and that the marketplace could absorb. So having a cohesive story is sort of number one. Number two, getting everybody to tell that story and buying into it, both internally and through the partners. And that's a process and a skill. Number three, and I love that what Connie said about testing. I mean, there's nothing like putting a couple different pieces of content up on a blog and seeing which one resonates more, or doing the same thing over a period of time when you're doing your social sharing to see, you may think that the only thing that people want to hear about is your category and the functionality, and it may turn out that they're really interested in business tips that are relevant to that particular type of audience. And if you are trying to build a community, which I think a lot of brands are, testing is a good way to sort of hear resonance and reaction. And it's not necessarily do you look to see how many, but what kind of ferocity did they bring to that share and enthusiasm did they bring to it?
Well, it's interesting too, because with our proprietary network, we have over 250,000 suppliers, plus all of the quote unquote buyers, right? Connections. And so we have a panel. We can be asking those questions in order to get more and more voice of the customer to enrich our not only our data set, but also how we go to market with products.
Yeah, you can't see it, but my eyes are lighting up at this very moment. It's because when I think about that opportunity and what that represents, I just see a wealth of fresh stories to be told, and how this idea can just continue to extend. So it's a very exciting time here. Connie, thank you so much for being on Renegade Thinkers Unite and being a Renegade client.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the hard work you and your team do. It's really paying off.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And so for all of you who have been listening to this show, I thank you as always for listening. If you really enjoyed this, do me a favor and share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. And until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.